Hello, everyone. This is Matt Rizzetta, the CEO of N6A, here for our latest episode of Outcomes and Omelettes, where we meet with different leaders from the world of business, media, and philanthropy each month. So today we have a very special episode of Outcomes and Omelettes for you and for us. We've been operating in this crazy COVID work world it's crazy to think about, but it's almost 9 months now, as hard as that is to believe. So I thought it would be a great conversation for us to have for our team members, our clients, and our network of friends and all supporters out there. Just have a real talk this month about work life in COVID, and perhaps to help many of you out there who might be struggling with the realities of working in this challenging environment. So I thought, who better to bring in for this talk than my good friend and a true authority, and I mean a true authority when it comes to professional development, workplace skills, leadership, and management, than Tania Luna. Tania, the co-CEO of LifeLabs Learning. Tania, great to see you.
Wonderful to kind of see you. I can't see that.
Tanya's up in Warwick, New York right now in Orange County, and I heard a rumor about a pig floating around in the background somewhere in your yard.
Yes. Well, yeah, you made the assumption that it's in my yard. She's actually in the house. She's an indoor pet pig. And that was one of the ways that we're coping with COVID, is everything just started to feel so repetitive that we were like, what should we do? What should we do? Should we just adopt a pig? But we did. And she's wonderful and horrible in many ways.
Maybe I'll ask my wife if she'll let us adopt a cow. I don't think that would go over very well.
My ones are smaller.
So let me just introduce Tania to the audience. I'm super honored to have Tania with us. I'll tell you, Tania is one of my favorite entrepreneurs and leaders in the world of business. Tania really gets it. Tania understands empathy and communications and so many of the skills that are required to be successful in today's workforce, which, as we know, the workforce is changing by the minute, really, like we were talking offline about Tania. Also, Tania and her team at LifeLabs are just so amazing. I mean, they're just so invested in their clients' success. They've trained something like, I think, Tania, so over 200,000 people at some of the most well-known companies in the world. I'm talking about companies like Salesforce, Slack, JetBlue, Warby Parker, Peloton, and they train them on topics that are incredibly important, critical really in today's workplace, topics ranging from leadership and management to diversity, equality, and inclusion, to communication, to sustainability, engagement, remote work, just so many amazing topics. And Tania's also a very successful author. She's an author of the book Surprise, Embrace the Unpredictable and Expect the Unexpected, which is a perfect title for a book in this environment. And she's also a really well sought after national figure on the topic of workplace skills. Tania's she's given a TED Talk. She's been quoted and featured in places like Psychology Today, HBR, the Wall Street Journal, and many others. And Tania's also the co-host of a very successful podcast called Talk Psych to Me. And believe me, Tania, over the next 30 minutes or so, I am definitely going to be talking psych to you.
Yeah, my ego. Oh my gosh. That was too many nice things said about me in a condensed period of time.
Well, it's funny. So Tania, let's get into it. Obviously, let's keep the focus of today's conversation on just this crazy work world that we're living in and working in. But before we do that, I thought it would be great just for you to maybe talk a little bit about your background, your upbringing before you began your professional career, and then maybe we could talk a little bit about LifeLabs and what you folks do over at the company.
Yeah, sounds good. I guess the aspect of my upbringing that is most surprising to most people when I talk to them is that I grew up with no indoor plumbing. We had a straw roof. So I'm from Ukraine originally, moved here when I was about 6. We got refugee status because of the Chernobyl accident in Ukraine, and the US opened its doors to us. And so we got to move here. A story that my family likes to laugh about is when we first got here, we stayed at a place that we thought was a hotel that we, 10 years later, when we wanted to celebrate our US anniversary, found out was a homeless shelter. So that was the contrast of where we were coming from to where we were. And I try to, I grew up in the US, obviously I'm almost thoroughly Americanized, but it is an important part of who I am, because when things become unpredictable and when things are at their worst, I try to keep that contrast alive in my mind and stay grateful, which has really been keeping me surviving throughout this time.
Tania, where did you move to when you came from the Ukraine?
New York City.
Oh, so you've been in New York since you came.
Yeah. And then just recently we moved to Warwick with the dogs and my husband and my cat and now a pig. And I saw one of the questions in the comments was, does your pig snore? She does not, but you might hear one of these dogs snoring.
Hey, speaking of comments, thanks for bringing that up. I just want to, everyone in the audience out there, feel free to submit questions in the chat box, and at the end of the session, we'll get to any and all questions that are asked, even ones about pigs and cows and livestock of your choice.
I'm an open book.
So Tania, let's talk, before we get into kind of the crux of the conversation around working in COVID, just talk to us a little bit about how you came across LifeLabs and what LifeLabs is all about.
Yeah, well, those are two very different questions. I guess I'll give you the short version of how I got involved with LifeLabs. So LifeLabs was started by Leanne Renninger and Dirk Liedig, who started it off as a company that was open to the general public, so workshops on life's most useful skills. And one of the workshops that Leanne was developing was on the psychology of surprise. Separately, at the time, I had a company called Surprise Industries where we used to organize surprises for people, and we would consult companies on how to both increase and decrease surprise strategically within their organization. And so she was looking to buy, she got really excited about it. We had both studied psychology in the laboratory in different ways. We both have a psychology background. She has her PhD in cognitive psychology. My focus was on emotional psychology and leadership development and organizational design. And so she got really excited about surprise and tried to buy surpriseology.com, and I owned it. And then like a week later, someone at my company reached out to her saying, oh, the workshops you're doing could make a great surprise. What do you think about collaborating? So somehow life brought our paths together. We met over bubble tea in Brooklyn, kind of like fell in love immediately and started actually writing our book together on surprise almost, I think it was like within weeks of meeting. And then LifeLabs Learning really started to take off and started getting business bookings versus individual bookings. And that was more my area of expertise. And it was such an amazing opportunity, a great opportunity to work with her and be a part of her vision. And so moved over to LifeLabs and have been here about 6 years now.
Wow. Amazing. It's funny, Tania, before we I got to tell the story about how we met. So so we were recruiting LifeLabs as a client, and what are we like? But this was when we were working out of the office. We're like a few blocks from each other.
Yeah.
So Tania, and you got to understand me, like I am not a normal person, as my wife will tell you. She's like, you know, who did I marry? You just don't, why can't you just do normal things? Like I do such weird things, you know? And so I guess what I'm saying is I don't meet a lot of people, you know, who are like me. And then Tania and I are going to get coffee in Soho, and I'm like talking about some of just my crazy little quirks and all the little weird things I do. I'm like, sometimes I read from bottom to top. I'm like, you know, I'm a big klutz. And then Tania's like, yeah, so am I. She's like, I read bottom to top too. And I felt like I was with the female, you know, version of myself. And so now I know why. Now I can understand totally why your clients are so comfortable with you, because you can make, you know, really kind of crazy and awkward and weird people like me feel very comfortable and at home. Like there's nothing wrong.
One to no one. We have we have a whole Slack channel at LifeLabs called Face Plants, where we all share embarrassing things that we've done. And then there's like a specific subgroup that we call the Klutz Club. And I'm potentially the president. I'm not sure. It depends on the week.
We should have a competition. I think I would take you down.
We should. We would totally partner in N6A. We could be like,
all right, so let's get into the conversation, Tania. Look, it's crazy to think about it, but it's 9 months almost, coming up on 9 months in the pandemic and COVID, and I don't know what. I guess the first thing is, what's your experience been like, just observing how people have worked in the pandemic from, you know, March to now November. You know, from my perspective, it's changed a lot. Like the first few months, everyone came together, galvanized. Everyone was pulling in the same direction. There was no such thing as Zoom fatigue and virtual work fatigue. And, you know, now I think as we're kind of settling into this as the new norm, it feels like we're starting to see some of that taper off. Have you experienced that as well?
Yeah, what I'm seeing is we were at a place, and I'll do a little psychology speak just because this is how my brain works. But March, April was what I would say is characterized by acute stress. So acute stress is, that panic response and this flurry of activity and really high spikes of cortisol. Now I would say we're in actually a more dangerous space, which is chronic stress. Chronic stress is that low level stress. For anyone here who's living in New York City, an example that researchers often look at is the impact of living near a train station or a subway, where you're constantly hearing that rattling background, and you actually see that it bodies into this constant state of like slight readiness. So I think now there's this combination of that chronic stress combined with another form of stress called hypostress, which is the stress of not enough variety and not enough stimulation. And so I think we're trying to cope with a very different set of challenges. It's not so much, oh no, I have to change how I'm doing things. It's more like, how do I have that feeling of thriving and growing and connecting when everything feels both low grade uncertain and predictable at the same time? It's a super weird place to be for our brains.
What are some of the tips and best practices that you have, and how are you kind of counseling your clients who might be dealing with some of the chronic stress phase now?
Yeah. So, I think the first step is try to understand what is the source of your stress. It's going to be really different for different people. One of the things that we've seen is that people's work-life balance, use that word these days, has really started to melt and get kind of mushy. And that creates a stress because there's this feeling of being constantly on versus really how our brains and bodies are best suited is intervals. High stress, low stress, high stress, low stress. If we're constantly in this like mid stress, that's not great. Also not great for working out, apparently. So one of the things that if one of your stressors is that work-life balance, kind of bleeding over into each other, something that we've seen work really well that we were talking about at the very beginning that I think people are now starting to realize is having some form of start-stop rituals. So knowing, even if your physical space isn't changing, when am I in work mode? When am I not in work mode? For example, the other thing that we're seeing is having really good dark time norms with your team. So saying things like, okay, let's agree to when no email, no Slack, no phone, no GChat, whatever it is that you're using, so that there's more of a boundaried existence that I think our brains really need. So that's one example. On the other side of it is if you're feeling too much consistency, too little surprise, I think it's all about being incredibly deliberate and engineering dopamine production. So you need to think about, how do I create progress markers? How do I create something where, even if it's just something like, let's talk about our small wins at the beginning of every morning as a team, or at least in every one-on-one. Or maybe it's about, like right now I'm writing my second book with Leanne.
Congrats.
Thank you. So I'm really excited about it, but it's a lot of pressure. So what I've been doing is at the end of every writing session, I'll literally do my word count and I'll make a little visual for myself showing what % done I am with my first draft. And it's silly. I'm literally Googling like, what does 40% look like? And then I'll like paste it in my Google Doc, but it's helping my brain go, oh, I'm not trapped in this, kind of timeless, spaceless vortex. There is progress. And then introducing surprise into your life, like adopting a pig. It's also a great way to remind your brain, hey, there is variety out there. There is, whether it's outside of your home or inside of your home, there is the possibility to learn something new, do something new, create a new challenge for yourself.
I love that, Tania. Tania, let me ask you a question. Just looking at things from the perspective of team leaders, if you're leading a team right now in this work environment, like can you share some of your observations in terms of what sort of successful leaders in your mind have done in this environment, and then maybe some lessons from leaders who haven't necessarily been so successful in the way that they've communicated with others? What's sort of separating the two in your mind?
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to share that. That's actually something we're constantly using as a methodology. So we study what makes great managers different from average, and we boil it down to what are the concrete behavioral units. So what are they specifically doing? We could be here for a very long time. So if we focus on just some of the core pieces of it, I think the number one differentiator is making the implicit explicit. What I mean by that is a lot of people are not having the conversation about how much things have changed and how important it is to take the time to say, given this reality, what should our team norms be? For example, when do we email each other? When do we call each other? How often should we be meeting? Am I allowed to decline a meeting, or do I have to go to every meeting? I'm getting Zoom fatigue. Should we agree to a certain amount of breaks that we take? Should we agree to no meeting days? Should we agree to one-on-one days? Things like that. Those are just examples. But the underlying principle that we see is actually sitting down, standing up, whatever you do with your team, and saying, let's actually talk about how to set norms for each other so that we are operating under shared agreement. It's much easier to do when we're in person because we're constantly giving each other, without even realizing it, little bits of feedback about that's working for me, that's not working for me. In a virtual space, we have to be a lot more explicit. The other macro thing that we've seen is actually pre-COVID, and now even more so, is a ritual of doing retrospectives or debriefs. So it's a constant cadence of extracting the learning from everything that's happened. And I could obviously be here for a long time telling you about, like, here's specific skills and here's specific rituals. But if you practice some form of debrief ritual, you'll figure out so many of those things on your own. So a debrief is something like, okay, let's pause and think about how this past month went, or how this past project went, or how that conflict went where we all hated each other for a day. There's Huckleberry. Sorry. What can we learn? So what worked well, what didn't work well, what's something that we can do differently next time? So I think just this ritual of learning and collective learning shifts our mindsets from things aren't working and I don't know what to do into, yeah, I might not know what to do, but we have so much data that we could extract and turn into insights for the future. So those are two. I can definitely keep going.
Can you give me an example of something on the other hand that's not working in this environment from your observations so far?
Not working is, well, opposite, not addressing it. So not like, we've seen a lot of people try to separate work and life and your professional self and your personal self. There are some cultures, I think, where that works. For the most part, it doesn't in our experience. So that's people saying things like, we will say absolutely nothing about politics, or we will not talk about racism in this organization, things that's out there and this is us, or let's just focus on how great everything is and let's focus on the future and let's focus on our goals. I think that people are really, that high stress level is requiring some cognitive offloading, some ability to be able to share the things that you're feeling. It doesn't mean turning all of your conversations into complaint sessions, but it does mean creating an environment where you can just say, yeah, we are living in a really difficult time. And yeah, I know that you are overworked. Thank you for, putting in that time. It also doesn't mean being a pessimist all the time. It doesn't mean saying wallowing in how bad things are, but it's about creating that balance. There's a famous concept called the Stockdale paradox. Do you know this? It's like being able to balance realism and hope, right? So it's like, don't downplay how bad things are, acknowledge, call it out, create space for some of the negative emotion, and at the same time, don't lose sight of the fact that there are so many things to be grateful for, and there is so much hope on the horizon.
Great, that's great, Tania. Well, those are the team leaders. I wanted to talk about the enterprises or the organizations or the institutions. Obviously, if you're running a company now, you're dealing with employees. I mean, this is an incredibly, there's a lot of anxieties. There's a lot of stress that's floating around there. I mean, what are you seeing from companies and enterprises themselves that are doing the best job at supporting, being there for their employees in this environment, and ones who aren't necessarily doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Two things come to mind. First is there has been a lot more openness and normalization of the importance of mental health, aside from just physical health.
Sure.
We're seeing organizations, I'll tell you where this works well and where it doesn't work well. Where it works well is when organizations focus on mental health benefits, focus on things like wellness days, and saying you can use your sick days for wellness, their health days or mental health days, creating opportunities to do things like stretch together in the morning, or yoga, or we had someone on our team who's still doing this. He's been doing this, I guess, going on 9 months now, where every single Friday he hosts different games that we play together. So it's like creating space, both kind of top down as an organization, as well as infusing opportunities organically to say, hey, let's create mental health, wellness, connection opportunities for each other. That could be literally things like extending your therapy benefits, or it could be things like, let's create opportunities to pause and breathe and play and connect. Where I think companies can go overboard is when managers or people ops people are expected to all of a sudden become therapists.
Yeah.
I think that's, like with everything, it's all about moderation. I think that is a dangerous and extreme degree, because all of a sudden it makes a promise that we really are not qualified to fulfill. Therapists work really hard to be therapists.
Yeah.
So, and there's such extremes of what people are now that I worry that if we go too far in saying, let's turn our conversations into therapy sessions, that is setting people up for underserving their teams. So I think it is important to say, hey, if you need, and we all encourage it, if you need professional support, here are some resources we offer.
Sure. Tania, no, that's a great point, Tania. I wanted to also ask about sort of the opposite end of the employee spectrum, which is first-time job seekers and really, young employees who are just entering the workforce. I feel
good luck.
I was just going to say, I feel there's very, sympathetic. There's a lot of challenges that you're faced with when you're a first-time graduate, just to begin with, entering any workforce. Better yet, this workforce, which is crazy. So what would be some of your kind of advice or counsel to those first-time job seekers, early, employees who are early in their career, who are still finding their footing and entering this crazy work environment right now?
Yeah. First of all, yes, it is incredibly challenging to navigate the uncertainty of starting your career along with this kind of global uncertainty. On that note, I think something that we're seeing more and more in what our clients are looking for, and certainly what we're looking for in team members, is adaptivity skills. So while you might still want folks who are really good at structure and detail, it also has to come with a side of, and all of the work that you might do might be scrapped because our entire strategy changes, and we can mourn it and we can feel some degree of sadness, but then we have to move on. Or you might operate for some period of time with no clear instructions. The goals might be set and the goals might be reset. So I think all of us as humans, and particularly those of us entering the workforce and starting our careers, I think could do really well to work on our own adaptivity and resilience skills and demonstrate that willingness to adapt and be flexible in any interview setting. Luckily, the younger we are, the more neuroplasticity we have. Typically, it's actually easier to be more nimble. As we age, it can actually become really hard if we've lived in a routine environment. Pig fun fact, I've actually learned that for a pig to be well socialized, they really love routine, but you have to be constantly changing their environment, because if you stick to routine and something changes, they're going to absolutely freak out. So I'll go in there and I'm like, I'm going to move this over here so that you don't get comfortable, and put your food bowl there. And I think as humans, we're the same. One other thing that I would put out there is kind of related to adaptivity, is demonstrating a skill set of learning agility.
Sure.
And we all learn so differently. And I think it's about really understanding, how do I learn? What makes it possible for me to quickly get into a new environment and absorb what I need to, so that I can contribute in the way that I am best suited to. So I think that adaptivity skills and the learning skills, developing those skills, and then finding ways to pepper them in through that interview process, so that people see that what they're getting isn't just your skill set, but that meta skill set of knowing how to adapt and learn.
Great, Tania. We're running a little bit behind schedule, I do want to get to I do want to get to our personality survey. We got a bunch of questions from the audience that I want to make sure we get to before we.
Shorter sentences.
No, this is great. Before we do that, I need to ask you about. The world that we're operating in, it's so much different now, even when when we started our businesses. It's just so much more complex. There's so many more variables. There's so many data points that you need to consider into, your decision-making processes. So I guess my question is, as you look at the world around you today, DEI, being a great corporate citizen, sustainability. I mean, there's just so much stuff there. Wage equality. I mean, these are all, super critical topics that as corporate leaders, we really need to prioritize now more than ever. What in your mind is the role of a good corporate citizen today? And what are the things that companies should be doing to really make sure that they're prioritizing those above everything else?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that question. And what a beautiful aspect of 2020 that I think we're all thinking about this more deliberately. I think the thing that I'm seeing more and more of, although still not as much as I would love to see, is companies saying, hey, let's not think of things like systemic racism or inequities as something that exists out there. As companies, we have the power to be part of the system. Companies are the fabric of of our society. And so let's reimagine our companies to represent what we want the rest of the world to look like. Right? So how can we change everything from our interview process, our hiring process, our onboarding process, our performance review processes? Those are all, because we're human, are the pieces in there that we can be deliberate about extracting are things like, are we leaving space for bias? Are we constantly creating more opportunities for some folks than other folks? What can we do to create not just equality, but equity, and really tailor the different opportunities that we're creating, not to be the same for everyone, but individualized to different people's needs? And so where we get really, really excited in our relationships with clients is when they come to us and say, we don't just want to check the box. In fact, we will often not work with companies if that's the goal. We don't just want skills at an individual level. We also want to go that next step and say, how can we make tweaks in our systems so that the skills that we're teaching, for example, inclusion skills, match up with the systems we're creating? And I think that right now, as a corporation, is a huge opportunity to be a reflection within your company of what you want the outside of your company to look like.
Yeah. Great. Well said, Tania. Well said. Awesome. Well, by the way, the audience, we have a bunch of questions coming in. Feel free to continue to post any questions into the chat, and we'll get to them right after this. We have something we call an N6A personality survey, Tania, which is something that we ask every candidate before they join N6A, just to see how well they fit into our culture.
So this is high stakes.
This is very high stakes. So I want to see how well you would fit in. You have a head start though, since you're a client. So, so a couple questions included our N6A personality survey. Number one, if you were nominated for an Academy Award, which category would you want it to be in?
So this is how far under a rock I live. I don't even know what the categories are. I guess best learner.
Wow. Okay. I don't know if that exists, but I think we should create it. I think we should create. And it can be the Tania Luna Best Learner Academy Award.
Is that allowed?
Let's do it.
Okay.
If your friends had to assign a Twitter hashtag to describe you, what would it be?
Maybe hashtag Klutz Club Prez.
I was going to bet money that it had something to do with Klutz or with silly or something, but.
Yeah.
And then the last one, I'm trying to do this now by muscle memory, but we have a question where we ask candidates to describe their work style to a car, to an automobile. And I'm just trying to think of a few of the automobiles. So number one is a Tesla, which at the time we probably have to update these. This was created a few years ago, but it was, I'm the car of the future, so invest in me now to get ahead for tomorrow. There was the minivan, which is no frills. You get from point A to point B safely. But in a low maintenance way. There's the Mercedes, which is high priced, but it's worth it.
I don't think I'm gonna go with a Tesla minivan hybrid. Like there's
nice.
It's coming out.
We should write to Elon Musk. I don't know if he has that yet, but he's got to get on that. That's a good idea. The Tesla minivan.
I think that I guess it's not a minivan, but they have the Cybertruck coming out. Maybe that's
yeah.
But it's like low maintenance, but definitely playing by yet to be written rules.
Well, I think you'd be a pretty darn good N6A, or not that you, not that you'd ever want. Awesome. All right, Tania, we got a bunch of questions from the audience. So if you could spare us a few more minutes, I'd love to get this. The first one comes in from Sean Hutchinson. Sean's question is, what are some specific tips to cope in this constantly changing work scenario for someone whose personality and work ethic tends to focus on staying in control?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, okay, I'm going to try to focus on answering shorter because I'm very excited to have this conversation, but I realized—
No, keep going.
So one is, I would not take for granted that your personality requires control. I am a recovering control freak. I used to hate surprise, and that's one of the reasons I became really interested in studying the psychology of surprise. I used to forbid people from getting me surprise gifts for my birthday, like literally even a physical object. I was like, no, if I'm not telling you what to get me, you must not get it for me. So one thing I would just challenge somewhat is, to what extent is that identity of someone who needs control helping you versus harming you? And can you get in the habit of giving up control in small doses to release some of that need for it? And maybe that's just walking left instead of turning right, or letting someone make plans instead of you. That said, Matt, you and I were just talking about this right before. A tool that we teach in our adaptivity and resilience workshop is something that I've been using almost daily, called the two-hander, which is just constantly organizing your brain and your thoughts into, what can I control? What can't I control? Because even if you're getting better at letting go of control, as humans, we're going to need some degree of it, unless you're like high-level Buddhist. So if you're at a place where you're sort of, in the middle, then it's really about becoming more aware of, here are the things that are outside of the scope of my control, and I'm just going to accept that. And here are the things that are within my control, and let me today focus on the things that I can control.
Great. Trisha LaRocchia has a question for you. How, as managers, can we balance the need to get work done, especially client-facing, but also remain flexible to the changing needs of our staff as a result of the current environment?
Yeah, I think that balancing empathy and execution has been one of the biggest challenges. One thing that we've seen managers do successfully is to really outline what are the results we're looking for. So not what are the steps you have to take, how many hours do you have to work, but what are we actually looking to achieve? If you can focus on results versus the process, you create a lot more flexibility in saying, okay, well, I've got kids at home, or whatever, I can't be here for this meeting, but is there still something I can do to achieve? I mean, N6A does this better than anyone, is that focus on outcomes. Can I still achieve—
Thanks for the plug.
Yeah, XYZ result, even though we're all going to achieve it in a different way? So that's one. The other thing that we've seen managers doing really well is actually, again, making the implicit explicit and saying, here's the absolute top priority. This needs to happen. This next level thing, it can happen 2 weeks later. It can happen 3 weeks later. And just being really honest with yourself, with your manager, with your organization about what are the absolute must-haves, because we all know sometimes there's something that we think is critical, and then 2 weeks pass and we're like, was that really that important? Or was it just like something that seemed really important at the time? So constantly asking, is this truly a must-have, or is this something that can have a little bit of that space for 1 week or 2 week delay?
Great, thanks, Tania. Tania, the next question is from Danielle Montana. She wants to know, what's your advice for avoiding Zoom fatigue when the meetings themselves are unavoidable? Great question. Any scheduling tactics or advice to limit that burnout?
Yeah. Well, so there's a few different things with Zoom fatigue. One is that this actually I learned from my eye doctor, is that our eyes dry up when we are looking at the screen. And so you can actually, that causes headaches, and that causes dry eye, which causes headaches. And so something we've been doing a lot at LifeLabs is reminding each other to take blink breaks, like you could do it right now if you're watching, just like blink your eyes. Literally having eye drops, in the same way that in the winter a lot of people put lotion on their hands. We have to like lubricate our eyeballs. So that's kind of mechanical. The other piece of it is, I think people treat Zoom often as a TV show versus a play. It's not a TV show, it's interactive. And I think fatigue sets in when we're sort of just passively part of it. Instead, for example, with our workshops, one of the things that's been really important is to do things like, can we get people interacting in lots and lots of different ways? So is it chat? Is it polls? Is it everyone goes around and share their thoughts? Do we switch into breakout rooms so that people talk one-on-one, and then in small groups, and then in large groups? So I think just being, taking advantage of the medium and creating opportunities for a lot more interaction. And then lastly, one of the things that we know from research is that, for example, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi has done research on flow state and has found that one of the best predictors of life satisfaction is how often you experience flow. For many people, Zoom fatigue is just meeting after meeting after meeting, and you can't get into flow of anything. You just feel like your day is constantly chopped up. So there, I think scheduling agreements with your team around things like, I'm going to have 2 hours of time where we're not going to interrupt each other. That's just going to be my focus time, unless it's a real emergency. I think there's a new tool, maybe new, called Clockwise, that helps you look at your, it goes into your calendar and suggests how to rearrange your and your team's time so that you could have longer periods of uninterrupted time. I think that is all.
You got to check that out. 2 more questions. This one's from Jackie Agadello. Jackie wants to know, in an environment where we're already doing more with less, Tania, how can we be sure to carve out time for professional development and ask for that support from leadership as well?
I think that's a question for you, Matt.
Oh God, oh God. I'm failing miserably.
Yeah, I love that question, because I think that it's essentially, it's just like any other investment question, right? It's like, when you feel like you don't have enough time, how do you start investing money? When you feel like you don't have enough money, how do you start investing money in the future? Right? When you feel like you're unhealthy, how do you actually start putting in the energy to be able to get healthy? It's truly just an investment question. And like any investment, it's about starting small, and it's about treating that investment as just as important and just as serious as the thing that you have to do today. So for our clients right now, and always actually, we don't recommend flood your team with constant learning. They're already constantly learning. I think a lot of companies go for kind of overtraining, under-practicing, as someone on my team likes to say, under-practicing, overtraining. And so just saying like, hey, let me carve out, for example, our most popular programs are 2 hours a week for 4 weeks, and that's it. And over that period of time, 8 hours just kind of sprinkled across, you see this tremendous return on investment of people going, oh, the things that used to take me 4 hours now take me 2 hours. Or the confidence to drain our team's energy and slow us down now is reduced. So now we're getting that time back. So I think about it, talk to yourself and your leadership about that being an investment. And it's really about starting small versus trying to do everything at once.
Tania, this is the last question. I'm asking for a friend here, by the way. I'm just kidding. I'm asking for myself, actually. But so
I got that.
I want your quick study. So I want to just tee up a scenario, and then I want to talk about, like, because I think I'm probably expressing a lot of the feelings of many people at all levels of the org chart in the current environment. I'm tired of looking at a Zoom screen, 8 times a day. I see the same people. I love working with with the people, but like, it would be nice to get, some fresh new faces and stimulation. I'm sort of tired of the monotony and the grind, and I feel like I'm hitting a wall, right? To somebody like that, what's sort of the recipe? Like, what would you say, like, that person, like, if there's 3 things that person should follow as like the recipe for not just surviving like the COVID work world, but also somehow you're all about, professional development and improving skills. Like, how can you actually make it out of this environment a better professional? Oh my gosh. Yes.
Well, first of all, it's the mindset of it. It's looking at what's going on today. I keep quoting people on my team. Someone on my team back, I guess in April, said, "This is my first pandemic." And we were like, yeah, it's all of our first pandemic, most likely. So I think it's really easy to forget that. And I think number one, it's reconnecting with meaning. What research on burnout shows, for example, is that while most people think that burnout is just about overwork or stress, those things are absolutely real. But one of the biggest predictors is a loss of meaning. What Viktor Frankl had, a psychologist, Viktor Frankl, has this word for it. He calls it an existential vacuum. So it's like you're zoomed out. You sort of feel drained of life. And so I think reconnecting with meaning is really important, is saying, what's important to me? This is my break. This is my opportunity to rethink what matters to me, what I want to leave behind, what kind of experiences I want to collect. And I think that piece of it, who do I want to make an impact on? I think the who is really important. So I think that piece is really important. I think the other piece is there's so much we can't control about our future, but we can control who we become. We can control what skills do I want to develop? What do I want to become more confident in? What bad habits do I want to break? That's all about development. And we need development really badly right now, not just so that we can tackle these problems, but so that we can feel that sense of change and growth and progression. So I think that A, meaning B, forecast forward and ask yourself, who do I want to be? What do I want to get better at? Why are these skills important to me? And then C is look backwards so that you can give yourself that sense of progress, because while it feels like we've just been sitting in the same space and doing the same things, we haven't. And actually writing out those we have something that we teach and we use at LifeLabs, where people have kind of personal development portfolios or trackers, where they'll actually sit down and say, what were some of my biggest lessons learned or breakthroughs or milestones? What was feedback I got? What were times that, last year I thought I would never be able to handle it, and look, this year I'm doing it every day. So I think giving yourself that visual evidence of growth is incredibly important.
Amazing. I just wrote those down. It's amazing. Meaning, forecast forward, and look backward. I love that. The recipe, everyone out there, that's the recipe to not just get over the wall, but to jump over the COVID wall.
And adopt a pig.
And I was just going to say, Tania, this has been an awesome conversation. You've made us, on behalf of N6A, as happy as a pig in dirt. In dirt, I think is the saying, right?
Yes, I think that's one of those sayings. Yeah.
So thanks a million for this, Tania. This was an awesome conversation, super meaningful, incredibly relevant, and very impactful and important for us.
Thank you for everything you do, and for making ideas and information so accessible to people beyond even your client communities. I really appreciate getting to be a part of it.
All the best to you. Finish the year strong. We're rooting for you as always, and here to help in any way we can. Give my best to everybody.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks.
We'll get back to Soho. Hope we get a coffee when the world comes back to normal.
Tea for me. I don't think I can handle caffeine.
That's right.